Hi everyone, welcome to Infinite Being TV. My name is Suma. This program is about exploring next steps of evolution for human body, mind, and consciousness. I'm really excited to introduce our guest today, Paul Selig. Paul is a psychic medium and award-winning author of channel text. He's able to tune into guides and teachers from higher dimensions. He receives clairaudient dictations from unseen intellect called the guides. I want to thank you, Paul, for this great work.
Oh, well, thank you for having me here.
Tell us about yourself and how all this began for you.
Well, I don't really know how it began for me. I didn't expect to be a channel, and I never considered myself a psychic, although I had experiences when I was a kid that were very psychic, but it's not how I self-identified. When I was about 25 years old, I had a list of things that I had to achieve in the world that I thought would make me okay. And I got the whole list and I wasn't okay. And out of sheer necessity, I began to look for something more. And I found myself on a spiritual path. And I had an experience shortly thereafter of energy moving through my body. And around that time, or as a result of that, I really can't be sure, I started seeing little lights around people. And I studied a form of energy healing so I could get a context for what I was beginning to experience. And I found that when I had my hands on people, I could hear things for them. Mm-hmm. And because the information that I was hearing was being validated by the people I was working with, I began to trust the voice or the thought or whatever it was in those days that was coming to assist. And gradually over the years, the dictation improved. And I would say when I was in my late 40s, I realized that I had begun taking large portions of dictation when I was sitting with a group. I used to hear phrases and bits of information for individuals, and suddenly I had started downloading paragraphs and 20-minute lectures. And as that began to happen, I began to record them, which I had never done, and transcribe them. And that became the genesis for the work that I do now as a channel. During most of this period, I was a college teacher. I taught at NYU for over 25 years, and I ran a graduate program at Goddard College in Vermont. So my work with the paranormal or the spiritual was being done fairly quietly, and I wasn't looking to be known for it, certainly, because I had another life. But this is what's happened in my guides since, I want to say 97, so over the last 10 years or so. I'm sorry, what year is it now? 2007. 2007, the last 10 years, 2007, 2009, have been dictating books. So there are 5 books in print. I think the first one, it's called I Am the Word. And they said that was the beginning of a trilogy. And it was. And now there's a second trilogy that's well underway. The second book of the trilogy, the Book of Truth, will be out in June. And all of these books were dictated. So they're verbal dictations that are then transcribed, and then the unedited transcripts are the books. So I'm not sitting there writing anything. I'm sitting there with my eyes closed and listening and repeating what I hear, which is how I work, at least as a channel.
And it's been 10 years now since you have been...
I'm trying to remember when the first book was done. I want to say I Am the Word, 2009, I think, is when that was being dictated. So it's not a long period of time, maybe 8 years that the books have been coming through, and there are now 4 in print and a 5th on the way. So it's been coming very rapidly. But I had to work through a lot of resistance in order to be able to show up for this. When the guides first said we have a book to write, which is why, how it happened, I didn't quite believe it, but I showed up for it anyway. And the first book was dictated over the course of 2.5 weeks, in blocks of an hour and a half, 2 hours at the most, of channeling with somebody on a telephone in Berkeley, California, listening as I had, the recorder going, and then I would type up the transcripts originally. Now, fortunately, somebody else gets to do that, and I don't even have to do that much. I just show up and listen.
What was your resistance at the beginning? I can see it even in your books while I'm listening.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's a couple of different levels of it. I mean, some of it is who am I to be doing this? You know, I don't feel particularly evolved, and I don't claim to be a spiritual teacher, and I have no interest whatsoever in being a guru. I say that I'm the guy that sits in the chair, and I do. I'm participatory to the work at a level I feel like I'm a collaborator. I think they're using me, they're using my vocabulary, they're working through me clearly, and I'm able to interrogate the teachings, which I do, because if I don't quite get it, or if I don't quite trust it, I'm going to say something. Then the guides really have to address my concern. And most of those end up in the text, because as I'm taking the dictation, I may be going, hey, wait a minute. So that's some of the resistance. And I think, you know, this wasn't what I had planned for myself. I was somebody, first of all, I was raised something of an atheist. And I didn't necessarily believe in channeling or give it any real merit. I'm not a very good New Ager. I never was. This is this phenomena that happens. And when it happens, and this is part of the reason I do it, it's accompanied by an energy that's extraordinarily palpable for people. So when I do groups, you know, the guides come through with all this vibration or frequency or whatever you want to call it. And other things happen too. My eyes will often change color when I'm channeling. They'll run a very, very, you know, pale blue. I've never seen it, but the reports are consistent. So there are all these interesting things that come with it that I find enormously amazing and experiential. When I was first beginning to do the work, because I had studied energy healing, I was more interested in the energy that would come through than the information. So I was always dismissive of the information because it was coming through me, and the energy was like, I don't know what the heck this is, but this feels amazing. And I think one of the adjustments that I had to make was to give credence to the text, to the information that was coming through, you know, as it did. But I was initially more intrigued by the phenomena of the energy that would fill the room, you know, and that we could all feel, everybody assembled would feel it. If the guides would say, everybody feel a hand on your forehead, and we all went whomp, and our heads were pushed back, we were all kind of in amazement that this was happening. And, you know, the funny thing is, I think in retrospect, I was being prepared for the work that I do in many ways, including my work as an academic. I think was in preparation for this. You know, but this is certainly not what I thought I would be doing in the last quarter of my life. I think it's a delightful surprise in some ways, but it's not anything that I sort of, you know, had pinned down as a goal for myself.
And I understand that there is difference between people who have healthy skepticism and people who are judgmental. How do you handle people who are judgmental about channeling?
I think that they have a right to that. I certainly was, you know. I mean, I think it was easy for me when I was growing up to sort of throw out the baby with the bathwater when it came to religions or anything spiritual. I mean, I grew up in Manhattan, you know, until I was about 10, 11. And with the exception of one very weird year in a parochial school where we didn't do anything religious at all, I had no exposure to any of this stuff. So, you know, I thought that people that prayed were deluded or, you know, maybe not too bright or any of those things. I'd never had permission to have a spiritual life. And in retrospect, I think that was a good thing, because I was very, very hungry for one without knowing it, but I was as judgmental as anybody else. So I think the healthy skepticism is fine. You know, I don't know how this happens. I would like someday to get wired up in a lab, because there's something that happens physically. I don't know why my eyes change color. I just hear the reports. I don't know how the energy works or how my brain works when I'm doing this. Mm-hmm. It's a very physical experience for me, and not a very graceful one, truthfully. Occasionally I see videos of people channeling, and they're sort of floating along in a cloud, and I go, boy, I wish it was like that for me. With me, it's like, bang, here we go, and I'm just trying to keep up with it, and it's very arduous physically, and I've been known to channel for 5 hours in a day, which is 5 hours of dictation, often on my feet. I mean, my guides don't seem to get fatigued at all, and when I'm channeling, I'm fine. And the moment it's over, I feel like I just got, I just went through.
Do you
the
feel
marathon.
drained?
I don't usually feel drained, no, because I'm receiving the energy, but I can feel exhausted from the experience. And I often feel hypersensitive after I've been channeling a lot. I have a friend that calls it psychic burn, but it's a little like being sunburned and, and highly sensitive. So if somebody drops a fork across the room, I'm going to jump out of my skin. Because I think that my sense is that my central nervous system is being worked with as I'm channeling as a conduit. And my nerves are kind of raw after that. It takes a little while to sort of come back in and settle in after I work. But it's not a terrible thing at all. It really is just how I experience it. There are things that I know how to do to care for myself as a result of that as well.
One of the first things I wanted to ask to the guides is, how is this universe structured? Is it multidimensional? Is it a holographic field?
Oh, I get yes. They haven't talked a lot about this. I mean, if you want to ask a question for the guides, I'm going to have to disappear a lot because we're not necessarily operating at the same time. But what they've said to me is that, and they don't use terms like holographic. They don't use many terms that are born in science, but they also say that, the language of science tends to be particular to a decade, and that they say what is true is always true and has always been true. So they tend to use language that is slightly different, or perhaps more inclusive and less moored in the systems of technology that we work with. What have they said reality is? They call reality a construct, and essentially we're in agreement to it, and we're participatory to its creation through vibratory accord. And so that's a simple answer for how they have begun to explain this. When you get into things like time and how time works, they're starting to address this work in the books in ways that I find surprising, because it's not information that I'm comfortable taking at all. And when they do it, and when they start talking about, time as an idea, or that understand that time is essentially like, plates, one stacked on top of the other, and can be turned into. I'm gone. I'm just like, I don't want to hear this stuff, because I'm very uncomfortable as the one taking the dictation. But I do.
And for a demonstration to the audience, will you be able to tune into me and read my...
Well, that's a very different skill set. So when I'm channeling, I'm taking dictation from my guides. When I read somebody, which is a psychic skill, it's a different skill. Now, I operate as an empath. And for whatever reasons, I have this strange ability to step into other people and essentially become them. So if you ask about your sister and you give me her name, I might start to look like your sister, or take on her mannerisms or her demeanor and then hopefully I'll be able to hear. So I'm a radio. It's the easiest way to understand what I do. I'm a radio. And so if I'm reading for you, I'm tuned into you, and you're the station that I'm playing. If I'm tuning into your sister, I'm tuning into her, and when the guides are operating, they're coming through me, which is a very different way of working. So I'm essentially at that level. I'm only responsible at that level for listening when I'm channeling. When I'm working psychically, there's more interpretation involved. If I tune into you and you come through like that, I know that you might be defensive or angry or protecting yourself or ready to fight. But I don't necessarily know what that means. I'll have to go through different layers of inquiry or conversation to find out how to work with this information in order to support you in whatever you're needing.
And you're able to tune into people even when they're not around you.
Oh yeah, I don't. They call me a medium for the living, and it's an interesting thing. But, I have friends that are very good spiritual mediums, and their work is tuning into those people who've crossed. If you're still attached to a body, I can probably hear you. So I've had real success working with people in comas, locked-in syndrome, people that, have lost speech. But on a very practical level, I can also tune into your boss, who may be giving you a hard time at work, and find out what's really going on there. So in my practice, I'm tuning into people at very, very different levels. But no, 90% of the work that I do is by phone with people or Skype. I mean, people come into my office in New York City for sessions, but I have clients I may never meet and never see, and I'm tuning into other people, and I usually work with a name, and the full name for me holds the whole vibration of the person that I may never meet and never see. So I have no idea on the phone if I look like them or not. It's only when I'm in the office and somebody says, "Oh my God, that's him," when I tune into their husband or their son or their father. I go, good. I didn't know that I could do this until I did it. And there's nothing that I do that I knew that I could do until it was beginning to happen. Okay.
And I keep coming across this term, fifth dimension, a lot. Different people have explained it in different ways.
My guides don't talk about dimensions, and they don't talk about that level. I mean, I think it's a level of Christ consciousness, but that's what they talk about. So again, they're not appropriating the language of the New Age in order to describe things. They're using their own language in ways that I think sort of bypass that. I came into my work, the very beginnings of it, when I was in my mid-20s, late 20s, early 30s. And at that time, everybody was running around talking about activations of 12-strand DNA, and there was every other week was some other sort of cosmic celestial event with numbers, and it was like, okay, there's a lot of this stuff, but there's also, I think, an appropriation that we go into as a community around what things mean. So say, for example, I have clients that come to me and say, tell me about my soul contracts. My guides have never talked about soul contracts. They talk about agreements that we make, which is probably the same thing, but they're not using that language. So when they talk about dimensions, my guides talk about octaves. They use different language to say the same thing, that there are different octaves or different levels of vibration that we can be attending to, and I'm assuming that's the same thing.
And I heard you refer to the phrase Christ consciousness, and I read it in your book too. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like it's more of a state of consciousness versus the person itself.
It's a level of alignment, is what I understand. And this is all about alignment and vibratory accord. So it's the level of alignment to this kind of consciousness or this level of agreement. So they're saying to me, well said. And they say it's an idealization of who you truly are in the highest way, It's sort of what we can aspire to in terms of our being. So to be in, how can I say this, in co-resonance at that level is an expression of your consciousness. The guides say then claims another reality into being. My guides talk about this thing, they call it the kingdom. And they say the kingdom is the awareness of the divine in all manifestation. But the kingdom can't be claimed by the personality structure of the small self. It's claimed by the aspect of the self who knows who he or she is in truth, which is a higher level of awareness, which you can call the Christ consciousness. So that's the level of consciousness that claims another reality into being. And that's, the idea of another reality sounds like, crazy or foreign, but I think what they're really talking about is how we realize ourselves claims a world. And this is done individually and collectively. But how we start operating as a culture or society or as a world when we stop claiming things in fear, which is low vibration, will be vastly different than when we claim things in truth or in love or in awareness of the divine in all things.
How do we raise our vibration?
Well, I hear claiming it. I mean, in all of the books, there are exercises but there are also attunements to higher vibration. And that's what the guides work with. I mean, they're not here just to instruct us informationally. They're really offering a system of alignment. So the first attunement was to the frequency of the word, and they call the word the energy of the Creator in action. And that attunement was a very simple one, and you would repeat, I am word through my body, word I am word. I am word through my vibration, word I am word. I am word through my knowing of myself as word, word I am word. And what this does is it attunes, they say, the physical self, the field, and then the level of identification to who you truly are outside of the personality construct. Now, the thing with this stuff is if you work with it, you can feel it. And I do it in groups with, 80 people at a time, and we're all feeling the energy sort of go through the body and then expand. And then you can work with it in your field. So I am the word really is a teaching on how to begin to operate as that energy. And that's the foundational text for the ones that follow. And there are other levels of attunement as well that come in the subsequent books.
What is it like to be at their vibration? What are their challenges?
Well, I mean, it's hard, it's a very different thing to interview Paul than to interview the guides. So if you ask me that, all I can do is interpret. And then if I want to recede and they want to come through at some point, they may. And then it's a real crazy interview because then we're going back and forth. So I don't know. I know what it's like for me to be as them when they operate through me. And that's astonishing because I'm actually a somewhat shy person, and that, outpictures itself in my life as reserved. People think I'm reserved. I'm kind of shy. And I am not the person, I'm not very huggy, and I'm not any of those things that many people are, and it's a lovely thing to be. They're just not me. The guides, on the other hand, love the hell out of everybody. And it's an astonishing experience for me. One of the things that they do when they work, and they do it in workshops pretty frequently, is they do attunements through witnessing, which is they'll stand in front of somebody and they'll hold them in their field, as it were, and then they'll claim something for them. For example, you are free, you are free, you are free. And the person will be asked to respond, I am free, I am free, I am free. But the energy exchange through that is huge. And the guides are able to sort of look past how we see ourselves, past the masks, past the fear, past all of that, to some essential part of us that is love and can be recognized there. So the aspect of the self that would say, I am free, I am free, I am free, is not the personality structure who just wants to go outside and smoke a cigarette or worry about the job. It's the part of you that is always free, that is announcing that. The true self is the one the guides are addressing. And all of their work, in my understanding, is about a reclamation of the true self, or the divine self, or you can call it the Christed self. There are names for it in, I think, every, probably, religion. But they say that there's an aspect of each of us that is eternal, that is seeking to be realized as and through us in this body, in this experience that we're having with one another. And that is the great awakening that's happening now, as humanity begins to reclaim itself in a higher way outside of all this junk that we've created out of fear. Because if you look at our world right now, there's a lot that's been created in fear. And the only way to do that is to transform it. You can't keep creating in fear to fix it. It's just not going to work.
That's the thing I wanted to ask you with what's going on in our current reality right now with regards to violence or different leaderships. A lot of us are still looking for clarity.
Well, my guides don't do predictive work, and they don't talk about politics, and they've never mentioned the names of any candidate in a channeling. There are other ways that they talk about this, though, and one of the things that they've said, they said this back in I Am the Word, so 9-10 years ago, or 2009, whatever that is, 8 years ago now, it's only 8 years. But they said that, humanity is at a time of reckoning. And a reckoning is a facing of oneself and all of one's creation.
To say to them.
Well, again, Paul, I don't have much to say. I know no more than you do as a person on this planet. The guides have different ideas. In I Am the Word, which was channeled in 2009, now I can say that, they said that humanity was at a time of reckoning. And a reckoning is a facing of oneself and all of one's creations. And they say that what's been created in fear has to be recreated in a higher way. They also said, and this is one of the few times I've heard them speak directly about our country, but they said that we had an opportunity to, how can I say this, to know ourselves as a country in transition, as a model for change. But that if we continue to reinforce an identity as a conqueror, we were going to be in for a rough time. And so they have said that. What they're talking about now, 2 or 3 days before the election, this last election, I was channeling in Richmond, Virginia, and the guides delivered a lecture. And they pretty much said, okay, everybody, be prepared for great change. And they said, you're used to, having, I think they said, your reasoning is like, I'm going to have the milk as opposed to the cream in my coffee. They said, what you're going to be dealing with, what happens now is when the whole table tips over, and that's not even a choice. You're dealing with a whole other reality from now on. And I don't get that that's necessarily bad. They talk about this as earthquakes and floods, but they use this as metaphor. And they say the purpose of an earthquake is to reveal what's been hidden in the earth that needs to be revealed and healed. And a flood is there to wash away what's no longer needed. They're sort of not speaking about disasters. They're speaking about how we can attend to what's before us and the opportunities that are presented in every change.
So is this an opportunity for us to transform things?
I sure hope so. If not, we're a victim. And the guides say, you can't be a victim and a master at the same time. So, yes, this is a great opportunity if we take it as such. What are we supposed to do? I don't know. That's, again, what they want. They want to come through and talk to you about that stuff, they can. I channel almost every Wednesday evening in a live stream, and there can be, I think we had about close to 2,000 people on it last week. And the guides in this forum, which is ongoing, will often sort of address the larger concerns that we're all holding. But, they don't do this by talking about politicians or world events. They rarely do. They'll talk about these things in terms of how they relate to consciousness. But, as a psychic, I may have somebody come to me who wants me to read the stock market, and I can do some of that work, But that's not what the guides care about. They're really here to teach us who and what we are, and to support in a real transformation, I guess, of this plane of consciousness, of this level of agreement that we're all in together.
But for me, at an individual level, I do feel I was making, I was making progress in my inner world, but when I look at the outside world, especially the media, it's not reflecting that. And I also see some of my friends who have this contrast of inner world and outer world. How do we handle that contrast, especially now that it...
I don't know that there's a contrast. The guides say some really interesting stuff about this. They say as long as you can see it or imagine it or perceive it on some level, you're in an energetic relationship to it. It really can't exist without you. And that doesn't mean that you made the forest fire over there, but because you can see the forest fire, you're complicit to it on a level of energetic accord. Because you're complicit to it, or because it exists and you can perceive it, how you perceive it informs the thing you see. So the guides say that how you witness anything is impacting and transforming the object. So I think they talked about this a bit in the last book, the Book of Truth, which will be out soon. But they said something like, well, Paul is saying, if there's a book on a table in Paris, am I does that mean I have a relationship to it? And the guy'd say, the moment you know that there's a book at a table in Paris, yes. At that moment, yes, you do. Because you're informing it with your consciousness. So how we perceive anything individually and collectively will inform that. And when we want to exacerbate something by calling it terrible, we're supporting terrible. The way I understand that we transform the world is by lifting the world to a higher level of frequency. But that doesn't mean that you don't take action. I mean, if there's a fire and you get a bucket of water, put it out. You know what I mean? If I'm walking down the street and I see somebody getting in an altercation, I have choices about how to respond to that. And how any of us do anything and respond to anything is really a direct result of the consciousness we hold. So when you lift the frequency, how you respond to things will be different. But to sort of deny or to say that there's a schism between the inner and the outer is in some ways to decide that it should all be sort of pretty and lovely all the time. And I don't know that that's true either. I mean, God is in the mud and in the sky. I mean, you can't say this is holy and this is not. The guides say everything is holy. And the awareness of that is what starts to transform everything. But we have a tendency to say, well, this is what I like, so this is spiritual and this is good, and that's not. And I don't know that it really works that way. I think it's convenient, and I think it keeps us in denial about a lot of stuff.
But, and this is just my observation, and I could be wrong, it seems like suffering has been an important aspect of human reality. Why is it that, and is that the right way to go towards awakening?
I don't think so. I think it's one way. It's one way. I don't know. I don't think it's the only way. I hope it's not.
But it seems like a common way, and I hope that's changing, and we are more shifting towards non-suffering ways of waking up.
Well, I hope we are too. I didn't get into this stuff because my life was going so well. I was a year out of Yale. I was a playwright. I had a career that looked like it was taking off in the way that I thought it was supposed to. And I was a wreck, and I think had everything been going the way that I thought it should go in my life and in my world, I don't think I would be doing the work that I do now. But for me, I had to see on a certain level that my way, or my small self's way, wasn't working terribly well in order for me to begin to even look at the possibility of something else. So for me, that was a reckoning. That really was. And there was another world on the other side of that in some ways. And I'm not saying that everything has changed, everything is hunky-dory. It's not. But God is a different. That much I do know. But the guides have said something to the effect of, well, suffering is one way to learn, and you have other ways to do it if you want to. But it's just one way. Now I feel that as long, we've been given free will, and we can do with it as we wish. I sometimes have said, I don't know if I think the guides would let me walk into traffic if I wanted to. But if I say, is this a good time to cross the street? They might say, not wise, which means you have the choice to do it, but you may not like the results of having done so, which puts me back again in choice. They're never overriding my will or anybody else's, as far as I know. But I think that also implies that we have choices about how we learn. Now, if you want to look at, a country and how a country learns or how a world learns, we can learn the hard way. There's lots of ways to learn a lesson. Suffering is one of them. I don't think it's mandatory at all. And there's an old thing that they say in 12-step land. Pain is pain, suffering is optional. And I think that there's some truth there. I don't know that you get through life without some pain. I think it comes, and I think it can be learned through like everything else and can be part of this amazing process of being. But how I want to suffer it, because I'm very good at it if I want to be. I know how to do that. I can do it for days. I just don't have to, and we do have choice.
What does an awakened planet or an awakened Earth look like to the guides? What is their vision for an awakened Earth?
I hear it's a realization of the divinity in all people. I hear that awakened planet is a world where people cherish the one before them as having a right to be. They're saying, none of you know that each other has the right to be, and you do. You could be otherwise. You really couldn't be here otherwise. That doesn't get earned. When you were born, you have the right to be.
And what is awakening? Could you elaborate more on that?
I'll see if I can step back, and let them come through. But I'll say this, the guides have said that even our striving for awakening is the ego, and the ego's idea of what it means to be awake, and that there's still a kind of, I would suggest, spiritual materialism attached to this. But let me see what they want to say to people. And I should say this because your audience may not know me. When I channel, I whisper the words as they come, and then I repeat them. Everybody hears things twice. It's miserably awkward to watch sometimes, but so be it. You've asked for it, so let's see if they want to say anything when you were awakened. Or they're saying when you were awakened, you know who you are. And because you know who you are, you know who everybody else is as well. You can't deny the truth in another because you can't deny the truth in yourself. The true self that you are, the divine as you. The divine as you is in complete awareness of the divine in all things, of the divine in all things. We are awakened. When you are awakened, you can't disregard. You can't disregard another in any way, shape, or form because it's God, because you are witnessing God as and through them, as and through them. Your ability to claim this, and your ability to claim this is what supports the realization of a new world. The divine as you. The divine as you is who is awakened, is who is awakened. The small self is never awakened. The small self is never awakened. You all think to go get awake. You all think you have to all get awake, but that's the small self. But that's the small self wanting to achieve something. When the small self disappears. When the small self disappears or recedes to her right place, or recedes to her right place, or is acclimated to the vibration, or to the vibration of the whole in a way that is congruent, with the higher awareness to the higher awareness. This is manifested, not because it would be a nice thing to do, not because it would be a nice thing to do or would feel better, the true self as you. The true self as you, the divine as you. The divine as you is who you are. Everything else is an idea, period. And they're saying period.
And is that alignment between your small self and divine self, is that the reason of incarnation?
Well, they're saying yes and no, the evolution of a soul. The evolution of a soul in her learning of the true self, and the true self's emergence through this is participatory to this, yes, but you're looking at outcome. But then you are looking again at outcome. I am here to be awakened eventually. I am here to be awakened eventually, which would be, let's say it differently, which would not be so, to be awakened. To be awakened is to know who you are, is to know who you are. And that only happens in the moment you stand it, not someday other. You see, you rely on time. You see, you rely on time to understand yourselves. To understand yourself, you place yourself in this time. And you place yourself in this time, in a linear time of sequence of comprehend things, so that you can comprehend things. The eternal self that you truly are. The eternal self that you truly are exists outside of time, but knows itself in time through you, but knows itself in time through you as you have the shared experience of time. As you have this shared experience of time, and that is a very positive thing, and that is a very positive thing. They're saying, but don't place it in the future as a destination. Claim yourself in the present moment. Claim yourself in the present moment. It's the only moment you can be realized in, period, and they're saying period.
That part is a little confusing for me because on one side it seems like it's about being okay with the way things are, but on the other side I also question the free will concept, like having the free will.
Well, if I understand what they're saying, I mean, you have a right to choose. So if I want to go blame everybody else for my problems, I can do that. And I can do that my whole life long, and I learn what it's like to have done that. And that's a choice. And maybe it's not the highest choice, but maybe it's a choice that needs to be, maybe it's something that needs to be learned, that it just doesn't work. Blaming other people for your problems just doesn't work. Does it? It's never worked, I don't think. So, is it about accepting that? I can't say, I don't think that that's what they were saying at all. I think what they were saying is that there's a part of you that's already awake. And that's what you're accessing. So if you put that part of you somewhere down the road in the future, you're never going to be okay. Do you understand this? Let me get it from them. Tell the young lady. They're saying, tell the young lady it doesn't happen in the future. It doesn't happen in the future. It happens in the moment you stand in it. If you are disregarding the divine in you in any moment, you disregard the divine in everything else. It's a choice. It's a choice, but it's a momentary choice, but it's a momentary choice that can have eternal significance. You've all been taught to believe that awakening takes lifetimes, that awakening takes lifetimes. In fact, it takes a second. In fact, it takes a second because you're already awake, because you are already awake at a certain level of vibrational agreement. As you attune to that agreement, you may know it. Now, we are not telling you that this is easy or hard. We are simply saying that there is an aspect of you now, that there is an aspect of you now, the true self, we call it the true self, we call it who knows who she is and can claim the kingdom, into manifestation, into manifestation. So, in order for this to be so, you must bypass the egoic structure that seeks to rule the world. The throne cannot have two kings, period.
And if that's the case, what's the purpose of having the ego structure?
It's an opportunity to learn and to remember who and what you are. It's been created for you. It's been created for you over millennium by you as well, and by you as well as a way to know yourself in the world, as you realize yourself. But as you realize yourself and what is true, you actually move beyond the requirements of the personality self, to know itself as separate. Personality self, the personality self is separation in its separation, or in its belief in its separation, supports all things separate, supports all things separate. The true self does not. The true self does not. So this is the opportunity. Now you're here to learn. Now you are here to learn. This is your schoolroom. This is your schoolroom. Every opportunity is a gift. You perceive it this way. If you perceive it this way, if you see yourself. If you see yourself as in the opportunity of learning who and what you are, reclaiming who and what you are, of reclaiming who and what you are, the world will reflect this. The world will reflect this as you agree to it, and not a moment before. To be in agreement means vibrational accord. What you agree with, you are in resonance with. You are in resonance with what you are in resonance with. What you are in resonance with, you hold in your field, and becomes as you are, and it becomes as you are, the true self as you are. The true self as you are is here, but must be agreed to be known, period. And they're saying period.
I might have touched this topic earlier. What is the reason of incarnation?
To learn, to agree, to be who and what you are, to be who and what you are in all ways. This is a wonderful school, is what I get.
and the school is about learning, learning and aligning with your true self.
Yes, if you wish it. They're saying yes if you wish, or something very different if you wish that. If you wish that, there is no one schoolroom. There is no one schoolroom. Every consciousness is having its own experience, is having its own experience, what it requires to go through, of what it requires to learn through, period. You're saying period. Yes, it is. You know, I have a friend, Natalie Sudman, who wrote a very, very good book called The Application of Impossible Things. And in her book, she says, you know, you come here for all of this, to know what it's like to have all of these experiences. And I think that that's a wonderful way to look at it. It's accurate. And I also hear, and it's accurate.
And how do we sharpen our psychic abilities?
How do you shepherd your psychic abilities? Well, hell if I know. And the guides, I don't know if they'll want to say about this. They're saying it's not about psychic abilities, it's about a demonstration of who you are in a higher way. That's interesting, it's accurate. It's accurate, psychic separates you from it. They're saying psychic separates you from it, if it's an expression of you. If it's an expression of you, the ability is simply an aspect of you. The abilities are simply an aspect of you, calling into manifestation what they need to know themselves, calling into manifestation what they need to know themselves. So, let me just explain how I work, which was not, I don't know how I do what I do. I'm not a trained medium. And there are very good people that are trained and have all of this esoteric knowledge, and some of them are my friends, fortunately, so they can support me when I have questions about what I'm doing or how I'm doing what I do. I hear. That's what I do. I'm primarily clairaudient. It's not like I hear a voice in the room going over there. That happens very, very, very rarely. It's mostly another voice that sort of seems to override my own thoughts. As if you can imagine, when I work as a channel, I'm often, when I'm way deep, which is not here, when I'm way deep, I'm channeling a lecture or channeling a book. I imagine initially I'm driving at the wheel of a car, and then I'm imagining turning the wheel over to the guides, and then I'm imagining crawling into the back seat. I crawl over the front seat to the back seat, and I'm like, I just read a magazine. That's how I do it, and I'm letting the other consciousness come forward. I'm allowing my personality self to recede. Now, my psychic abilities, I didn't know that I had them until they started to prove themselves out. And that was astonishing to me. The first, I was doing hands-on energy work, I was doing healing and stuff, and then people started to show up just because they wanted to talk to the guides. And I went, okay, if you want to do that, we can do that. It was easier on me, because I have no patience for doing hands-on energy work. Other people are very gifted at that. It's not my thing. It was very good. So some woman came and she sat down opposite me and she asked about her father, and my eyes were closed, and all of a sudden she gasped, and I opened my eyes. I said, what's wrong? She said, oh my God, you look just like him. And I guess he had crossed, and it was not a good relationship, and she hadn't seen his face in years. And it really shook her up, and it shook me up too. And then I found out I could do it every time. I could step in at that level. And that's just an expression of clairsentience, which is clear feeling. So how do you develop your gifts? The first thing I always say to people is ask. Ask. But also, you got to know why you want what you want. People sometimes say to me, I want to be a channel. Why the hell would you want this? I'm basically taking dictation for a living now. I left my career in academia. I sit in a chair with my eyes closed and I repeat the next phrase. And I do that for a 300-page manuscript that can't be altered. I can't go back and fix it because I said something wrong. Now, it's fascinating work in one level, but it's not, I loved teaching college. I did it very, very well for a very long time. And every day I showed up in my classroom, I was grateful. And grateful to be participatory to that experience of learning. And I feel, there's a part of me when I show up and do workshops that's still able to source parts of that self, because I still get to hold a room and do what I do. But really, I'm stepping back and allowing this other thing to come forth. I'm much more present in the psychic work. But when I say you have to know why you want to do it, I think, the psychic stuff that I do is all there to support other people. My gifts developed, frankly, in a way that supported the work that I was beginning to do. I remember, though, and the other thing I think about this that's important is you have to realize that on a fundamental level you deserve this. It's a part of you. I started seeing lights around people, as I said, in my mid-20s. And I still see them, and I often don't know what the heck they are. They're these beautiful, violet lights sometimes, or, these firefly things that go off, these cobalt blue orbs, and they're beautiful things when they show up. But it wasn't anything that I sort of expected or planned on. It began to happen. But I was jealous of my friends who were psychics that had these very well-developed third eye screens. I call them, I say, what do you get on so-and-so? Oh, I'm seeing a guy in a brown jacket smoking a pipe. I thought, well, why can't I see that stuff? And funnily enough, this is probably 12 years ago or something, 10 years ago, maybe it wasn't that long ago, I decided one day, because I got inspired to open up a chat room on the internet to read in, because I wanted to see if I could hold a room of, say, 45 people at once and be that quick and not have any visual information and not have any names, just a screen name, to see what would happen. And all of the screen names were taken for all the psychics, and I ended up with this really shoddy name. It was like Second Sight, something like that. And I kept thinking, I don't want that name because everybody's going to say, Second Sight, what do you see? And I kept thinking, I don't see, I hear. So I open up the room and the first person shows up and says, Second Sight, what do you see? And I'm typing, I don't see, I hear, when all of a sudden I begin to see. And I had a ball. I sat in that silly room for months, maybe 2 months. I was telling people what they were wearing on the other side of the computer. I was describing their rooms, the cracks in the basement of the house they were about to buy. I had a ball. I think what happened was, in a funny way, I claimed it. Okay, I can do it. Here's the name. I'm stuck with it. But you see, in order for any of this stuff to happen, we have to know that we have the right to it. The guides say we can't claim what we can't hold. And again, that's the whole idea of energetic accord and agreement. So think of it this way. If you go to a restaurant and you look at the menu, right? And you know what you have in your purse. So I can afford the steak, I can't afford the steak. It's up to you to choose. So the menu that you're holding is what you believe you're allowed at all times based on your value, what you hold. So if you believe truly that you have the right to order clairvoyance and that exists and can be had, you can hold it. But if you sort of think, well, maybe or not really. But the other thing is, if you're going to do this stuff, you've got to prepare to clear the stuff around it. Because, I feel in my case, I want to say that it's been earned, but none of this stuff came without some form of a price to it, and I don't mean that our cost or, for example, if I'm judging somebody, I can't read for them. If I'm frightened, I can't read.
There's a moral code.
It's not so much that there's a moral code, it's that it's cut off. If I've judged you, I've already decided who. I've known a lot of different kinds of psychics. We have different abilities. Some of them don't have a very well-developed spiritual life, and they have great gifts. In my case, my abilities came with the spiritual work. So perhaps that's just how I work. But I do know that if I'm judging somebody, or I'm frightened of them, or for them even, I'm not going to be a very effective read. It's one of the reasons I can't read well for myself. I have an investment in the outcome. My guides are helpful to me, Paul, on a daily basis in the moment. And they're very good at helping me not make choices based in fear. Because one of the things the guides teach is that the action of fear is to claim more fear. And every choice I make, because I'm afraid, tends to get me more of the same thing that I don't want. So on that level, I get counsel. But if I say, is this a good day to play the lottery? First of all, I don't think they care. And second of all, that's not the level of information that I'm accessing. And I'm not going to get it. Do you know what I mean? Maybe somebody else can work that way. I can't. And there are people that I know that are very gifted, and we trade with each other because I can be neutral for them on their stuff in order to be an accurate read on a situation. And they can do the same for me.
How do we connect with our inner guide or angels?
They just said listen and allow it, and allow it. Listen and allow. Don't demand, but agree, and it can be there, and it can be there. Nothing can happen until it is first a possibility. When you agree that it's possible, when you agree that something is possible, you create the room for the alignment you seek. The alignment you seek to be in contact can be claimed for you, can be claimed for you with their assistance, as you open to them, period, in their same period.
And I could be getting semantic here, but is there any difference between guides and angels?
They're saying yes and no, different octaves, guides can be operating at different levels. Guides can be operating at very different levels, the angels that you understand. The angels that you understand as such operate at a very different realm, period.
Do they still experience some of our lower emotions, like anger or...
I hear only if we want to. And if we want to experience that, we can. We have no need, but we have no need, so we don't choose it. So we don't choose it.
Could you elaborate a little more on Christ consciousness?
They're saying it's the alignment to the availability of the Christ itself, the true self, if you wish. The true self, if you wish, who knows who she is without adversary, who comprehends beauty without delineation, the aspect of you who has come to be known as the true self. As the true self operates in different consciousness, at a different level of consciousness than the small self ever could. The small self knows herself through history. The small self knows herself through history. Her parents said she was who her parents said she was, what her culture told her to be, what her culture taught her to be, the divine self as you. The divine self as you has no mother or father, has no mother or father in this regard, is independent from this world, but knows who she is in conjoinment with her source. She is always connected to the source of being. She is always connected to the source of her being, and consequently everything else within it. And consequently everything else within it, because there's no source of love, because everything is of source as well. The delineations you make high and low, and between high and low and in between are prescriptions, ways you know yourself, ways you have known yourself throughout time, because you identify through your creations, which means the things you see before you create alignments. You create alignments and agreements with lower octaves because you anticipate yourself as in relationship to them as you outgrow form. As you outgrow form, the need to be in a body, begin to witness differently. You begin to witness differently, but as you are in form. But as you are in form and have lessons to learn here, the level of Christ self. The level of Christ self, or the divination of the true self, through the identity that's held, through the identity that is held as the prescription for being whole, period. So in other words, my sense is, and don't tell me if I'm wrong, that to sort of align at that level of Christ consciousness is how high we can go while we're held in form in the material realm. Do you understand this? The God can be realized through the human form as who and what we are, and that's what they're saying, because because nothing can be outside of it. So let me see if I can make sense of this. And this is a newer teaching, and I don't describe it very well yet. But what they've been talking about in the latest book, called the Book of Truth, is that we've been operating with this sense of, God is in the cloud and we're in the mud. And, or we have this body that we're sort of dealing with here that's really just a vehicle for the spirit. And they say, well, the body is as holy as everything else, as the tree, as the sky. And God is in the tree and in the sky and in the body as well. So the realization of the divine in all things can't exclude the material realm that you hold. That you know yourself through the body you hold. So as you begin to realize this, you begin to again shift the whole experience of the material realm for yourself. But I think that there's more to it than just, oh yeah, God is in everything, sure, which is an easy, I can say that. But to say something and to realize it, and the guides say realization and knowing are the same thing, to know that is a very, very profound state. Now, do I walk around knowing that? No, I don't. When I'm operating as the guides, when they're teaching through me, I have a taste of it, and it's extraordinary. It's extraordinary. For me to be able to be participatory to them, looking into the face of someone I have never met in my life, and seeing just sort of the breathtaking beauty of them. Just the breathtaking beauty is an astonishing experience. But I'm guarded and protected, and when I worry about what people think of me, and you should lose 20 pounds, and whatever this stuff is, that's my small self having its day at the cost of the other. And the other is the divine self. So that's the closest I've gotten to experiencing this, not really. But they just said not really. They're saying to me, you're farther along than you think. Don't denigrate the self. Don't denigrate the self. It doesn't serve anybody. It doesn't serve anybody. The good news for all of you is, the good news for all of you is you're here. You are here to be as you truly are, as you truly are. And his descriptors of the experience he had, can ensure you all have the same experience, can all have the same experience as you realize yourselves in this way. As you realize yourself in this way, you don't have to be a channel. You don't have to be a channel to be yourself. You have to be your true self, the God self that came with you, that is always you, that knows who everything, everyone is, everything and everyone is in the higher octaves, that are to be known through you, that are here to be known through you, period.
Is the divine self's experience, is it expanding as our body's experience is expanding? Or?
Well, is the divine self's experience expanding? Yes. Well, it's an interesting question. I don't know that I quite understand it, so let me see if I can get them to just answer whether the divine self knows who she is. The divine self knows who she is through all experience, every single thing that ever can. Every experience that can ever be had is recorded and known by the true self, is recorded and known by the true self. Is the divine self expanding as well? Is the divine self expanding as well? If that's what you're asking. If that is what you're asking, yes, in fact it is. Yes, in fact it is, because realization happens. Because realization happens through all things. In each moment you stand, you can imagine the divine is realizing itself through you. If you can imagine the divine is realizing itself through you, you are not the divine self. You are not the divine self at a level of personality with yourselves. But the true self she is realizing herself. She is realizing herself through all things, and that is her expansion, and that is her expansion, period.
What do you have to comment about some people who get attached to certain modalities or techniques to experience the divine self, whether it's meditation or...
I hear only if it's serving them, it's fine. If it's serving them, it's fine. If it's become a hindrance, it should be looked at again. It should be looked at again.
What is next for you? Are you writing any more books or workshops?
Well, I'm doing a lot of workshops. I mean, I just show up. The workshops, the guides teach them. I show up, I sit in a chair, I close my eyes, I step back, and they come through and they teach, and they attune everybody to the energy. And whatever they teach, whatever attunements they do, really seem to vary upon where they're going with the work. And the work is unfolding. So the next book, the guides have said the title. I don't know if they're going to stay with it, but I assume they will because they announced it. They were calling it the Book of Freedom, the last I heard, and that hasn't been channeled yet. And I assume that'll be coming within the next 8 months or so. The new book, the Book of Truth, is out in June. And so, but mostly I show up. I show up for these Wednesday night live streams. I had a group that met in my apartment of 5 people, 13 people, rarely more than 20, for about 18 years in this little apartment in New York City. And that was the laboratory for this work. The guides would come through, people would leave $10 in a basket, and I would, my job was to put the chairs up and then take them down. And then I'd go teach the next day, go teach college the next day and forget about it. And that's been replaced by the live streams, which are on Wednesdays, and that's become a very large classroom for people. But it's the same thing. The guides are teaching an ongoing course. And I don't know when it ends. I don't know how many more books there are. I really don't. If somebody had told me 10 years ago that I would have, and by the way, I was a writer with the worst writer's block of anybody I'd ever met in my life as a playwright. It was misery for me. And if anybody would say, you're going to have, 6 books out, within 9 years, I would have thought they were completely out of their mind. And if somebody had told me that none of them would take more than 30 days to produce, and that they would all be spoken, I would have thought they were, they should be put away. But this is what's happened. And so who knows, I guess, is the real answer. Who really knows what's next? Would like to say something about that. They're saying we would like to say something about that, and it will not be what you want to hear. The books will continue as long as we can teach through you, because we have a lot to say. Because we have a lot to say about how you operate. But how you operate as the channel will be shifting as we realize ourselves through you, as we realize ourselves through you, and as you operate in the higher realm. And as you operate in the higher realm, the dictation becomes easier. The dictation not only becomes easier, but without effort, in all ways, the transference of thought. The transference of thought to text has been somewhat arduous for you physically, has been somewhat arduous for you physically, and that is about to change. And that is about to change as we align your systems. As we align your systems, what comes next to what comes next, the reader will be in benefit with this as well, because the frequency that transfers to you, because the frequency that transfers through you to the reader itself, through the written page will be known and realized in a very different way, in subsequent texts for a higher benefit than we have been able to attend to thus far, period.
And you would be able to continue with those books even if you haven't read the previous one?
Yes. Where you start is where you start, and where you need to start to begin, and where you need to start to begin.
I'm just curious, are the guides in contact with any other beings from other planets, or is it just...
that's no place that they really go to. Yes, they're saying yes, of course, why wouldn't we be? Yes, of course, why wouldn't we be? But you're looking to glamorize us. But you are looking to glamorize us in this question, and not understand us, and not understand us, the reality that we know. The reality that we know, the octave we exist in, bears little resemblance to what you know, except what we should do, except when we wish it to, however we have known ourselves in form. However, we have known ourselves in form and may choose to again, because all things are possible in this realm, because all things are possible in this realm of delineation of worlds. Your delineation of worlds or planets is still subjective. It is still subjective. You are limited to your very limited understanding of how the universe is put together, period.
Well, is there anything else you would like to share?
Paul? No, thank you for having me. I'm fine. I'm asking them. I'm getting no. Thank you for having. They're saying thank you for having us. So I guess that's the scoop.
I'm really grateful for your books. It's been amazing, and it resonates with me very deeply.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
To find out more about Paul, go to paulselig.com and Suma with infinitebeing.tv. If you like this video, please leave your comments and please subscribe. I will see you soon, and thanks for watching.